Hi everyone, this is Raven from Fly. Welcome to the Fly podcast series. The objective of this series is to educate NDA aspirants and help burst myths around several areas, including the application process and campus life. In this episode, we have with us Shweta, who coaches NDA aspirants for GMAT and GRE exams. In the next two episodes, we'll be discussing on the importance of these exams, GMAT versus GRE, recent changes to these exams, and our thoughts that would help candidates during their exam preparations. With that, let's dive deep in. Hi Shweta, thanks for joining the podcast. How are you?
Hi, Revan. Very happy to be here. All is well. This is round one season and we are coping well.
Great. Good to hear. So, firstly, Shweta, please share your background with our listeners.
I have a very eclectic background, and this year I completed 20 years in test prep. I hope you're going to tell me that I don't look that old. But I spent 7 years working with engineers primarily on prepping for CAT, the Indian MBA entrance test. And then I moved to working with tier 2, tier 3 colleges with a Pearson company. We were investing in employability skills. And then more than 10 years ago, I moved to the GMAT GRE segment and I've stayed there ever since. And I have loved it a lot.
Great. Very interesting background to say the least. So before we kind of dig deeper into these two tests, right, GMAT and GRE, can you help us understand the importance of these test scores, taking into account the overall candidate's profile from MBA admissions perspective?
Well, a lot of schools today say that they don't really require a GMAT GRE score along with your application. But given how tough the competition is, most of these schools have selection rates, acceptance rates as low as 5% or maximum 9%. So given how tough the competition is, if you add a GMAT or GRE score to your application, it improves your chances of selection. Among my student community, I have not seen anyone apply without the score as of now.
Okay, understood. Let's pick GMAT first, right? Can you talk about the recent changes that GMAT has announced for the GMAT exam?
Yes. So GMAT is coming up with what is known as the Focus Edition. It will be available a little later this year. And for 6 months, there's going to be an overlap between the two exams, the old exam and the new exam. You'll be able to take either of them. And gradually by Q1 or 2 of next year, they intend to phase out the old exam. And everyone will have to move to the new edition. It's called the Focus Edition. The Focus Edition is actually a snappier, a cleaner version of the older GMAT. On the structure front, like what were the sections, they have done away with the essay writing section altogether. Earlier, GMAT had different scorings. The integrated reasoning had a different score, AWA, the essay writing had a different score, quant and verbal were getting scaled out of the 800 score. So now they've introduced this one uniform score. Everything is going to be scored together. Integrated reasoning is now part of the overall 800 score. It's no longer a separate test. And with the entry of IR into the main fold of GMAT, what GMAC has been saying over the last decade, ever since they introduced IR, they've been saying that IR is the future of GMAT, and they have made a move in that direction. There are lots of reasons for the new trimmed version of GMAT. And I think there's been a lot of debate online, discussions as to why this happened. Some responses we have from GMAC themselves, like why they did what they did. But largely, it is a much needed change. It's nothing negative for the test taker. GMAT needed to move in the direction of becoming a test that's more tuned in to capturing your aptitude for real life business situations. And writing an essay was definitely not part of it, or the sentence correction questions on the verbal section, they were not required. So it's a move in the right direction. So now you have integrated reasoning with more questions than before. Instead of the earlier 12 questions, you'll now have 20. Quant has gone down from the 31 questions to 21. Verbal has gone down from 36 to 23. Each section for 45 minutes. So it's a leaner, more efficient exam that we are looking at. From a test prep industry point of view, a lot of test prep was unfortunately focused on teaching grammar rules. So the test prep industry will have to reinvent itself and we'll have to start thinking in terms of reasoning skills, higher order reasoning, and data analysis skills is what the new GMAT is about. And I think I've been blessed in that sense that uh, over the last decade, that's what we've been focusing on at Catamount Labs. Our focus has been very reasoning driven. So we are very excited about the new GMAT.
Got it. Understood. And from the candidate point of view, right, which one should the candidate take while there is this overlap, current versus new format? And this can be, based on A, where they are in the prep process, or B, their profiles or backgrounds. What would you suggest as a coach?
I would suggest that if you have already started prep last 6 months ago or 6 years ago, then you should stick to the old pattern and take the GMAT in the next few months and get it done with, because your score is anyway going to be valid for 5 years. That doesn't change. However, if I'm starting prep afresh, I can take the new exam as soon as September. So I wouldn't mind trying out the new exam. The only problem with that's going to be is that a lot of test prep doesn't have the required, the testing systems are not ready.
Right.
A lot of people may not have tests related to the new exam. So that's the only bottleneck. Otherwise, if you are somebody preparing for GMAT afresh now, you should start thinking about the focus edition.
Got it. Understood. And this is one of the common questions that we get as well, right? As in, what is the preference for B schools? Let's say if you have candidate A and candidate B, candidate A has scored X using the old format, and candidate B has scored the same X using the new format. Now, what would be the preference for B schools?
From a B school point of view, if I'm a B school, I don't know right now how to interpret the new GMAT scores. So my gut feel is that people will want to validate their scores against a known system like the GRE. So I wouldn't be surprised if 2024, we see people taking both the GMAT and the GRE, or shift from the GMAT to the GRE. There'd be a sense of security that at least this is a known system. The algorithm is known, the scoring is known. I don't, and if I've done both, it's a benchmark, right? So I think B schools are going to wait and watch for some time till the validity of those scores, how to perceive them, all of that is proven. The same thing happened when GMAT introduced the integrated reasoning section. For a few years, 2-3 years, we found that the B schools were not really looking at the IR scores because they didn't know how to interpret them. Now, a decade later, when they have enough and more data points on the relevance of IR, you see IR moving into mainstream GMAT. So I think it's going to take a little time for B schools to have data points to look at old versus new, or the new GMAT versus the GRE. We'll know in a couple of years.
Fair enough. No, very interesting insight. Thanks for that. And you brought up this comparison, right, between GMAT and GRE. And very recently, if you look at it, even GRE has changed its test format. So what about that? Can you maybe elaborate on this change?
Yes, the GRE change is interesting. When it first happened, I said, oh, this is prime example of FOMO. GMAT is changing, so I should also change.
Yeah.
But actually, GRE hasn't changed a great deal. Okay. It's not the kind of overhaul that we are seeing on the GMAT. Earlier, the GRE had 2 essays in its AWA section. It's cut it down to 1. It's made the exam shorter, but it hasn't changed the questions or how the scoring was happening. So, for instance, if earlier you had 40 questions on quantitative reasoning to be done in 60 minutes, now you have 27 questions to be done in 47 minutes. Earlier on in verbal, you had 40 questions, 70 minutes. Now you have 27 questions, 41 minutes. So they've made the exam shorter and they haven't given you an overlap period because the existing resources are good enough. They haven't changed the question types. So come September, you will be forced to take the new GRE. There's no overlap period. What is interesting about the change in GRE is the choice of essay. From 2 essays, they've gone to 1 essay.
Right.
And when I first heard about it, I thought they would have retained the essay, which talks about the analysis of an argument, which is more of a logical reasoning task. And that's the essay which the GMAT had also retained when it did away with 2 essays and came down to 1. But what GRE has done is they have done away with the analysis of the argument, and they have retained analysis of an issue, which is like participating in a debate and taking a stand. So one wonders, why would the GRE retain analysis of an issue over the argument? And then I realized that analysis of an argument is anyway covered in critical reasoning on the verbal section. That's what you're doing. You're
Yes.
kind of attacking an argument. So it's redundant in that sense. But by retaining the issue essay, GRE is saying, look, I am not just for the MBA. I have a larger application. You can use me for a master's degree, for a PhD degree. So it's a very interesting choice of essay to retain.
Got it. Understood. And these days, if you look at it, right, most of the B schools, they accept both GMAT and GRE scores. So taking into account the recent changes, what's your take on this GMAT versus GRE debate? As in, who should go for what, and what's the reason?
That's a very good question. Earlier, I was not too much inclined towards candidates taking the GRE. There was a perception that GRE is easier. So some people thought, oh, instead of the GMAT, let me take the GRE. And initially, when this acceptance began, when GRE started getting accepted, even B schools were, a little reserved about it. I saw greater acceptance with GMAT, but gradually things have changed. People have come to realize that GRE is not necessarily easier than GMAT. So who should be taking the GRE? If I am targeting the top 10 schools of the world, taking the GRE is not the easier route. Sometimes GMAT can be a whole lot easier because the GMAT is a question adaptive test. So the algorithm is a lot more forgiving in character. Okay. I can get a question wrong, and then I can recover from that if I get the next question right. GRE, on the other hand, is a sectional adaptive test. So the algorithm is not half as forgiving. You mess up one section, so your next section, the entire section is doomed. There's no recovery from what you've done in the first section. So I find that if I have to use GRE to apply to an MS, and I need something like a 315 or a 320, that's highly achievable. I might start off with a 300, 305 and get a 315, apply to the MS program. But if I need a GRE score to apply to the top 10 schools for business, for an MBA, I need a 330 and above kind of score,
Right.
which is not easy to get given the nature of the algorithm. I have seen people struggle to improve just one point across a whole year. So now I've made it a rule among my student community that they have to take an official test as a diagnostic before they start the program. Those who score less than 325 as on the diagnostic, they should not be using GRE as a tool to target 330 and above and to target the top 10 schools. For them, it is GMAT by default. I do not find more improvements in the higher ends of GRE, the 325 and above score ranges. We don't find score improvements that go beyond 5 to 10 points. That's the hard truth of GRE.
Got it. Very interesting. Understood. With that, that kind of brings us to the end of part 1 of our podcast with Shweta. Stay tuned for part 2, where we will continue our discussion and delve deeper into addressing few dilemmas faced by candidates while preparing for the GMAT GRE exams. Thanks, Shweta, and bye everyone.